Today I'm speaking with Eady Jay. Eady, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Tim, for having me.
Absolutely. And I'm just going to do a quick bio for Eady. She's from Sydney, Australia. It's funny, I just interviewed someone else from Australia recently. So we're on an Australia kick this week. But she's from Sydney, Australia, and she and her husband and two daughters now live in the US, in North Carolina. She studied theology at Tabor Bible College in South Australia. She's a writer focusing on spirituality, sexuality, family, health, and music. The website is called evangelicaldeconstructionjourney.com. And I'll have the link for that and everything else beneath this video. She talks a lot as well about deconstructing evangelical theology, hell, purity culture, sexual ethics, all kinds of topics. It's an interesting blog. I've been through it a few times, and you got some great stuff there. She's also a musician and a piano teacher, and there's some links for her music on her website. She's an author as well. There's some links again on her website. She's a podcaster as well. She recently joined Joy Williams to co-host the podcast called Journey of Joy. I'll have the link for that for Spotify beneath this video. And she began deconstructing her faith when she entered adulthood, which we'll get into shortly. But before we do get into your deconstruction story, could you just tell us more about yourself? We'd love to get to know people.
Okay, so yes, I grew up in the western suburbs of Sydney, which is on the east coast of Australia, and I I've lived there for 38 years before moving to North Carolina with my husband. Um, I grew up as a Christian, in a Christian family, attending Christian school, and very, very in that evangelical bubble. Yeah, what else would you like to know about this? Would you like to know anything specific about Australia or?
Well, I was going to ask about that, but real quick, since you mentioned your husband, how did you meet an American and get married?
Yeah, that's part of my interesting story.
Well, that's if
So
that's too much further. I don't want to jump ahead, but you tell us whatever you're going to tell us.
well, basically we met through Facebook, but yeah, it's kind of a lengthy
Okay,
story.
we'll save
So
we'll
I
save
will
that for
get
that
to
part of it.
that.
Well, then tell us what's your favorite part about, or what was your favorite part about Australia, and what do you miss the most, and what are you looking forward to when you get to go back and visit?
I do still love my family very much, get along with them. I have three siblings and my dad is still alive. So yeah, I love my family. I miss my family. I've got a lot of nieces and nephews that I miss as well. And just the landscape in Australia is quite different from American landscape. So I do miss some of the landscape and the animals and yeah, just
Mm,
different.
that's awesome. My sister got to visit there once, and she got to do like you see the kangaroos and the koala bears and stuff. I still have to
Yeah,
check that off my list.
yeah.
Well, we're here, of course, to hear your story. My channel is basically to give people a chance to kind of tell their story from the earliest days. And I know your journey is a little bit different than some of the other ones that we've done on this channel. But as I say a lot, we are asking questions, and just because we don't all land in the same place doesn't mean one journey is better than the other. We're all just trying to figure out what's true and what's not, and what's healthy.
Yeah.
And so I'm just looking forward to hearing your journey, even though it's a little different than others and mine. I think you have some good things to teach us today. So take us away.
Yeah, okay. So when I was about 4 years old, I apparently gave my heart to Jesus, as they say. So I don't remember it, but my mum says that I prayed the sinner's prayer and she was there with me and so basically I have felt like I was a Christian since I was four. Um, but I did feel in those younger years, there was a lot of confusion because at school, I went to a Christian school where they would constantly be like there would be chapel services every week and they would ask children if they want to become a Christian. And so we would spend a lot of time rededicating, like, oh, I don't know, am I a Christian or am I not? Because did I sin this week? Yes, I think I did. Does that mean I'm not a Christian anymore? So I rededicated plenty of times between the ages of 4 and 9. But I remember when I was 9, I just had this sense that I didn't need to do it anymore. Like this sense of, well, God has either forgiven me or not. And I'm just going to accept that God forgives. And I'm going to stop becoming a Christian again, thinking that because I've sinned, that I've lost my salvation. And so I started to believe, no, I believe I have salvation and I'm going to stop rededicating to God and I'm just going to remain Christian. That was how I kind of saw it as a 9-year-old.
Mm,
Um, yeah, so I I was at a Christian school, which was very it was very Pentecostal actually. So there was a lot of kind of Pentecostal worship, and teachers would tell us about various types of sin and how we needed to confess and repent and be well behaved and respectful, and swearing is a sin, and having sex before marriage is a sin. And there was a massive list of what you cannot do or shouldn't do. And it was I found it very legalistic, and it really, for me, it hurt my spirit. I was in this school from kindergarten to year 12 or grade 12. So the whole of my schooling in the same school. And yeah, it became very overwhelming by the end of it. Just the pressure to be perfect, and to be like, I was one of the kids who actually received those Christian character awards, because I was trying so hard to be the good girl. And during my teen years, I remember there was a lot of talk about abstinence until marriage, even though we did have some sex education and it wasn't totally hopeless. Yeah, just the emphasis on wait till you're married. And I sent a letter to a secular magazine called Girlfriend Magazine and said, I'm going to wait till I'm married. Why doesn't the whole world follow what I do? I think this is the best way to be. And just criticizing, I guess, the way that the magazine is very sexualized, at least in Australia. That was a very kind of like aimed at teenagers, but telling them what to wear and how to act and how to get a boy to like you, how to kiss. There's all kinds of stuff in there, and I wasn't very happy about it. So,
Did you feel like you
yeah,
were kind
I
of
wrote them a letter.
like becoming not necessarily in ministry at that lit stage, but just kind of getting involved as a Christian leader by speaking up?
Yeah, yeah, just trying to have some Christian influence and
Yeah.
encourage people to wait, basically.
Mm.
So, yeah, I did that. I wrote a letter. They interviewed me and took my photograph.
Wow.
And looking back on that, like I was actually an overweight teenager and found myself, like, thought of myself as very ugly. So I look at that and go, oh, like, no one's going to listen to me because I'm ugly.
Mm.
Um, so that was also complicated. Just the feeling of, even if I had something valuable to say, it'll be overlooked because of the way that I look. And people would just say, well, of course she would say that because she's never going to have sex because she's ugly. That's
Mm.
how I felt about it. That's as a 14-year-old. So
Mm.
yeah,
Wow. That's some heavy burdens to bear from at that age. Wow. And
yeah, yeah.
can I ask too, with the perfectionism you mentioned, did you have like a list or some kind of mental OCD of like, if I do this, 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 and this, then I'm a good Christian today? Like, did you have that kind of structured out or written out somewhere, or at least in your mind?
There was definitely a lot of pressure to read the Bible and pray every day. So by the time I was 11, I think I started reading the Bible as regularly as I could, maybe not every day, but as much as I could. I had a lot of struggles with reading the Bible. Like I would say to my mum, is it Chronicles, I think, is so boring because it's just all these lists and names and numbers. And I'm like, how do you even read this stuff? And my mum would say, oh, just, read the New Testament because maybe you'll get more out of it. So I think I skipped ahead, read the New Testament, and then eventually went back and read the Old Testament when I was probably later teens. But by the time I finished school, I think I had read the entire Bible, and I had memorized 350 verses, which is more than any other person that I knew, apart from my dad, who he's probably memorized 1,000 or more verses. It's interesting because my dad is not very scholarly or very well educated, but he reads the Bible from cover to cover every year, and he has memorized thousands of verses. So
Mm.
so he was very influential, even though he's not very yeah, not well educated, but in scripture he's like hardcore.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to
So
that. I was the same way. My dad used to make us take like 3x5 cards and write out verses on them, and we would
that's
sat every
exactly
Saturday
what my dad
morning.
had.
Oh, really? Okay. Every Saturday
Yeah.
morning, like I'd work with my mom on them during the week or by myself, and then Saturday morning was like his time to like check that you're doing it, and we would go through hundreds of them, and eventually I was a, you know what Bible quizzing is? Have you done that?
Sort of. Yeah.
Where the little pads you sit on, and when you sit up, it makes a light go off, and you have to answer the question. I did that
Oh
for
yeah.
years too, and um, again, thousands of verses too, and it's amazing when you get to a certain point where you can just like, it's almost like it's in your blood. You really feel
Hmm.
like you're kind of close to God because you're just like you're thinking, you're truly, literally thinking His thoughts after Him as these verses go through your brain and your psyche, and when someone comes up with a question, you always got a biblical answer, as it were, and it's a source of, I guess, when you're in it, comfort and pride.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Yes, I was proud of what I knew and what I'd read, and I felt advanced because there were a lot of kids who didn't read the Bible who were still Christian or claimed to be, but maybe not the same amount of pressure to read the Bible. And yeah, I was pretty proud of myself. But
For
at the
sure.
same time, I did feel a lot of guilt just around the craziest things. Like I found I struggled even to like, how do I step on an ant and realize that I've just killed a creature of like God created and not feel guilty about it. Like, seeing people kill insects or whatever. I've felt a moral dilemma, whereas other people would just go, this is just normal, right? And even silly things like shaving my legs. I actually debated in my head, is this a sin? Because God put the hair on my legs. Am I sinning by cutting it off? Yeah, I know it sounds really strange. Like, why would you feel guilty or conflicted over such a silly thing? And most people did not. I'm not saying that the school like put this on to me, but that environment or that the pressure to be perfect in general, I just internalized it maybe a little differently or a little extreme or something.
Hmm.
And
Can I ask you,
yeah,
you talk in your blog sometimes about just the struggles with depression that came later. How early in your journey
yes.
did that part of it show symptoms? And I know some of that might be not necessarily religion related per se. It could just be our personalities, and I'm probably very similar. I'm an introvert, and I get my blue days for sure. But like in terms of where you would look back at it and connect it mentally to or historically to the religious part of it, and you're feeling like you weren't measuring up in some way to God or the Christian perspective that you were being taught. How early did those symptoms come out, and what was that like?
I think I think it started with feeling lonely when I was younger, like even probably 7 or 8, just starting to feel like I have friends, but no one's my best friend. Uh, and I had started to put on weight around that age, like probably 8 or 9, and just feeling kind of more isolated, different from other people, not as socially acceptable, socially awkward. Um, and so internalizing a bit of self-hatred and then feeling lonely and making Jesus my best friend. um so yeah, I think it started with this feeling of kind of isolation and loneliness. And in my teen years, it became a lot more guilt. Like it evolved into this um like when you make friends with try and make Jesus your best friend, it's like constantly having this conversation with God in your head and feeling like sometimes I feel like God loves me, and sometimes I feel like everything I do is wrong. And just constant belittling myself all the time. Oh, what if that thing I did, what if that's not right? What if I could have done that better? What I said to that person was really bad. Oh, I have this habit of swearing in my head, and I've been told swearing is a sin. And I'm constantly, like, literally, I can't really explain it, but I was swearing in my head from a young age all the time
Well,
and going, I feel so guilty. And I'm not even saying it out loud. But later on, I did start saying it out loud, and I still feel that sense of like, is this right or wrong? Because socially, there's a social, um, not acceptance of swearing. Yeah.
Mm.
How do I deal and swearing in front of your kids? Oh my gosh.
Yeah. It sounds like
Yeah,
you really
it's
like you had a sense of you weren't safe in your own skin for a lot of that. Just life was just like constantly either something
definitely.
else was attacking you from the outside or you were attacking yourself from the inside almost.
Yes, yes.
Mm.
Yeah, it was a combination of inside out and outside, I would say.
Can I ask in that
Um,
context, the idea that Jesus gives you joy and peace and like his joy is overwhelming and the fruit of the spirit and all that stuff. How did you deal with that contrast of like I should be feeling joyful, but it's just really, really painful. His burden should be easy and light, but it's actually very heavy. How did you deal
yes.
with that?
Oh my goodness. I really had to fake it because going to a Pentecostal school where it's like people are jumping up and down on the stage, worshiping God, so happy, clappy, um, and feeling on the inside like, well, I'm happy some of the time, sure, but feeling this kind of like I would say I'm a melancholy personality and an introvert, and yeah, I just was not happy all the time. That was not me. So yeah, I felt that pressure very much and felt like I had to pretend and smile more than I maybe wanted to, or just continue to be polite when I felt really angry inside. Like, don't get angry on the outside, just be angry on the inside. But
Mm,
suppressing it, I was suppressing anger, I was suppressing sadness, loneliness, the whole thing, just suppressing it all, basically.
mm. That is a hard place. I know we're only just getting started, but that's a hard place to start from. Wow, that's a lot. And I'm sure
Yeah.
that's we're just touching the surface of some of that, I'm sure too. But um, can I ask when you mentioned salvation that you got saved, at age 4, and then you rededicated your life a few times and kind of nailed that coffin shut that you were definitely a Christian. But when you look back at that and your theology began to evolve, what did it kind of mean to you to have become a Christian, like theologically? And like, how did that evolve into like what I was going for with this is I think for me, my journey, some of my issues and questions and struggles, I began to really realize like you're struggling with something because you're not focused on the theology, like the theology, rethinking things, getting your head wrapped around the gospel, the glorious gospel of God's salvation is what will transform your mind. Obviously, the Bible in general, but the gospel itself will transform your emotions. So what was the gospel to you and how did that relate to some of these emotions? Did you feel like that ever came in and kind of like transformed some of these conversations or did it feel powerless?
So I guess the gospel to me, as a child, very basic, was like Jesus died for my guilt and sin. So everything that I've done wrong was crucified in Christ. And I guess he was punished in my place. I didn't like the word punished and I didn't focus on it, to be honest. Um, and that I get to live, I get to go to heaven, I get to, yeah, live and go to heaven, that kind of thing, because Jesus died in my place, and um, I get some level of forgiveness from his death. It was very very difficult to describe what level of forgiveness I got. There was a lot of debate around like, well, if I sin and I don't confess straight away and I die, do I go to hell? Because have I lost my salvation in that moment? And I remember as a teenager, I used to argue and say, no, it can't possibly be true that you lose your salvation as soon as you sin, if you die. Like, that can't be true. There has to be more forgiveness than that. But I did struggle to know how forgiven we really are. Like there was always you've still got to confess, you've still got to be sorry, you've still got to change, um, working towards perfection, working towards being a good person because that's who God wants you to be. Because that's why Jesus had to die, was because of all the bad stuff. So let's not be bad. Yeah,
So
that
you
was
weren't
my
really
kind of basic.
like you couldn't rest though in your salvation ever.
No,
Wow.
no, not really. I I think there were times when I felt like I could sense the presence of God. I could sense forgiveness. I felt loved. But other time, like, yeah, it was few and far between. And other times I just felt like nothing I did was right,
Hmm.
nothing at all. So I think to kind of explain why it was that extreme for me, it's not for everyone. Like the extreme level of guilt and shame. When I was 18 and felt really depressed, and I couldn't deny it anymore, and I needed to find help. So I went to see a counselor at Bible college who was like a student practicing counselor. And when I told her about the level of guilt, I called it guilt, not shame at the time. And I gave her like this list of 100 things that I could feel guilty for on any given day. And she was kind of like, she immediately said, look, this level of guilt says to me that you were probably sexually abused. She just point blank told me that I was sexually abused. And I was like, what? I have no memory of being sexually abused. But I thought, okay, I need to take this seriously because apparently it's not normal to feel this level of guilt and to be constantly hating on yourself. And there must be a reason. So what she's saying kind of makes sense. But I ditched her as a counselor because I thought what she did was wrong. You don't just come out and tell somebody something that you're waiting for them to tell you. Um, yeah. So I found another counselor who was a bit more experienced, and I said to her, look, this is what happened. This is what my previous counselor said. And I don't know if it's true. I have no idea. And my new therapist, she said to me, what would you say if you believed it was true? And I said, I would be so relieved to think that there's like an explanation, a reason for why I feel so much guilt and shame. That would, I think that would be really helpful. And she said also, she asked what my greatest fear was. And I said, my greatest fear was of being raped. And she said, well, usually, or a lot of the time, we fear things that have already happened to us. So um, during different sessions with her, I eventually saw like a picture in my head of being molested when I was a toddler, which is way before you can kind of remember. Like it didn't feel exactly like a memory. It was more of a picture of this is what happened, but it's very out of body, very disjointed, and it's very difficult to go, that is me. Well, I can see that it's me and I understand that it's me, but yeah, it's all very vague, if that makes sense. But that made a huge impact on my life and my psychology and how I improved from there, and it also impacted, I guess, every aspect of my relationship with God and my understanding of God and why do I feel all this shame, and still I claim to be a Christian, but I don't understand forgiveness and grace and those kinds of things. So
And that's just so much. It's amazing how many burdens and aspects of burdens you had to carry from the earliest days. And I can definitely see how that could affect the way you viewed God and so many aspects of what you're experiencing.
yeah.
I did want to ask, as you move forward through that, with that counselor and anyone else you talked to about it, did you feel angry at God for not protecting you from that as a kid?
Yes, probably more so angry at my parents, but it took a while to kind of own that realization of like, well, how come my parents weren't able to protect me from this happening? Um, yeah, but there was a time where I expressed a ton of anger just towards everyone and everything that I felt like had been building up for 10 or 20 years inside of me, and just needing to, I went and sat in my car, and it was nighttime, so it was dark outside. I was parked at the river and I just screamed at the top of my lungs. I cursed every person and everything that I could think of that happened, or like, you didn't protect me, and how could you do this to me, and all those kinds of things, and every cuss word that you can think of, and all the blasphemy words too. Like, yeah, it was very intense, but it was actually very helpful to get a lot of this stuff out of me and express anger. Yeah, that was definitely a big part of my journey and healing.
As you continued on that journey of healing, there's a lot of biblical messages we get in church and elsewhere about, God didn't want anything bad to happen to you, and he does have a what they sometimes call permissive will, where it's not he didn't want that to happen, but he permits things to happen for a greater glory or greater good. But he also wants you to know that he's the God of the brokenhearted. He is that loving father that is ready to wrap us up in his loving arms and hold us, and that he will even turn bad things somehow into good in the big picture. Did that
Yeah.
messaging help at all as you heard that from church and as you talked to people about what happened?
It's definitely what I believed at the time. So I believed God didn't cause it to happen, didn't want it to happen, but wasn't necessarily able to stop it from happening. I saw it more as like whoever did it, it's their fault, their problem, rather than God's. Uh, and just, yeah, this idea that um, like, understanding it from a perspective of God still loves me, and even I guess the way that I was raised, I understood that God also loves abusers and so God loves everybody. That's what I was taught, and forgives everybody. So there was a lot of emphasis on forgiving, for sure. Like, forgive the abuser, forgive um, anyone who hurts you. And I was probably more focused on how do I forgive than on my own, like, healing or recovery. And yeah, just I actually, so when I was a teenager, before I knew anything about this, I wrote a book about a girl who was raped and how she forgave the rapist. And that was, I look back and go, I think I was trying to deal with my own, things going on inside of me that I couldn't express, that I really didn't understand, and
Mm.
the emphasis on forgiveness, like that we should always be forgiving.
Yeah, it seems like that's
Yeah.
become a big motif of just a lot of the concerns that people are having these days of saying we're we're focused so much on forgiving. And obviously forgiveness as a general concept is a good idea, but a lot of times we're, number one, not focused on our own healing, and number two, we're not focused on the people who did the wrong things from doing them again. It's just like, you get a carte blanche to keep going, and especially when it's people in ministry, which is really shocking that some of those people can do horrible, horrible things when they're in the
Mm,
pulpit, and they're in
yeah.
their back office, they're in the pulpit on Sundays, and then they just kind of get a slap on the wrist and do it again. And it's sad because forgiveness is a great concept, but when it's taken to those levels, and especially I was always taught about forgiveness in the sense that, number one, of course, there's these verses that say if you don't forgive from your heart, God won't forgive you. So that's an issue. You're literally endangering your own salvation. But number two, it was like, you don't understand how bad your sin is, do you? Like, it doesn't matter if you've always done these little teeny, white lies. Like, your sins are so minuscule compared to the big ones of the world. But when God looks at it, it's all the same. You have broken his holiness, and you've offended God. You've abused God. And therefore, who are you to speak up and say, I'm going to judge someone else for their sins? You're in this, you're all in the same lot eventually. And when you look at it
Mm,
that way, it does kind of take away your power to say, no, somebody did something really, really wrong, and this needs to be talked about and
yes.
held to account.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. There was a lot, I was taught the same kinds of things where it's just like, we're all equal in sin, and so we're all equally bad. We're all equally deserving of going to hell, and so we all need to accept God's forgiveness and forgive each other. That kind of thing. Yeah.
Hmm. Would you say that was the main starting point of your deconstruction, or like where did that part of it, what were the early seeds of the deconstruction, and when did they really kick in that you could recognize them?
So when I was 18, I went to Bible College, Table College in South Australia, to study theology. And because I was so passionate about God that I just wanted to learn more. So yeah, I went to Bible college, and it turned out I chose well, in my opinion, because this Bible college, one of the first lectures that I heard was about grace. And even though we sing Amazing Grace all our lives, it felt as though I had never in my life heard or understood the word grace. Like the lecturer, he said, he quoted Romans 8 and how there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ. And I went, I feel like I've never read that verse. I've never understood it. Like it hit me like a slap on the face. Like, what? You're telling me I don't have to feel guilty. I don't have to feel like I hate myself for all of my sins, which is basically what he was saying. He was saying like that Jesus, when he died on the cross, took all of the sin and forgave us all, and now we are all under grace. So all of us, all the world, forgiven and essentially saved from sin and from guilt and condemnation. And so I went, wow, why have I been beating myself up and feeling so guilty for so long? And between that, like hearing about grace, which was then taught, it was a whole subject. So we learned about it for a year. Um, and then seeing a psychologist and like understanding what I had most likely experienced and why I was the way I was. Uh, yeah, just the combination of the two brought me to a new understanding of God and my relationship with God, and helped. I think I began the deconstruction journey there, but it was kind of more like a denominational change. How do you describe deconstruction? There are lots of ways to describe it, but it's like it could be as simple as someone going from being really very Baptist maybe to very Pentecostal. That would be like a radical shift that they might call deconstructing being a Baptist and reconstructing becoming a Pentecostal. Well, for me, it was like deconstructing, I don't know, all the conservative religion that I'd been taught and coming to this new understanding of grace and going, oh, I can actually make mistakes, I can sin, I can do whatever I want, and God will still love me and God will still forgive me, and I can still be a Christian. Because it's kind of implied, well, if you do all these bad things, you're not really a Christian. Or if you have premarital sex, you're not a Christian. We're just gonna, you can just stop going to church because you're screwed. So starting to contemplate, well, I actually am like a human being. I can make mistakes and I'm still loved and accepted by God. That was a radical shift for me. And I even started calling God a bastard God, like the childhood, the God that I perceived as a child was illegitimate compared to what I perceive now. So when I told some of my friends that I used to believe in the bastard God, they were very upset and insulted because they still believed in that God.
Hmm.
So yeah, just kind of deconstructing all of the legalism, perfectionism, and coming into these, I would call it radical concepts of grace at the time felt very radical to me.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah, it was very helpful for me personally, which is not going to be for everyone. If you don't feel a whole lot of guilt, then maybe you don't need a radical grace shift. So that was, I would say, the beginning of deconstruction. That kind of led to, well, then why is there a hell? Why does anyone need to go to hell? Didn't Jesus die to save us all from our sins? Therefore, there's no punishment now. So I was starting to go there in my mind. And definitely there was some various people at Bible college and or related to Bible college that I met through Bible college that would say, yeah, I understand God as someone who, when we die, holds us in his arms, in his loving fatherly arms. And if you're kicking and screaming, you might experience God's love as hell. But if you are content and happy, you experience God's love as heaven. And so they had this very unusual concept of heaven and hell that I went, whoa, that's different.
Mm.
And they call themselves hopeful universalists. So they hoped that, like, if you imagine if you're a baby kicking and screaming in the arms of God, that you would eventually calm down and realize you are loved and realize you're not in a dangerous place and everything's okay, and that you would come to heaven. So I basically became a hopeful universalist in those Bible college days. But it was, again, like if I, went home and talked about being a hopeful universalist, everyone was like, what in the heck? Like, that's very dangerous because, they've got to have some control over what happens to really, really horrible people when they die, or just, I don't even know. I don't know why people hold on to hell personally. It's like, why do you need hell?
Yeah. Well, it's definitely it fits in the paradigm of the carrot and the stick. If we can get you to believe our story, the biggest treasure is waiting for you, heaven, and you escape the worst pain out there, hell. And it is fascinating that when you mentioned your journey where you were like, why is there a hell? Didn't Christ die for us all? As soon as you said that, it made me think of the journey that many of us took, which was towards Calvinism. Are you familiar with that term?
Yes.
And that they answer that question that you asked, like, didn't Jesus die for us all, by saying, actually, no, he died for the elect. That's why there's a hell, because you're
Yes.
not elect. And that was the route I took, and a lot of other people that I, for some reason, tend to interview, they end up saying that was their route too. But you asked the same question that we were all asking, but you came to a very different conclusion, and it's fascinating. I would say
It's
your answer was more
actually,
gracious.
well, I think part of it might be slight differences in Australian and American Christian culture. Because I didn't really understand or hear of Calvinism until it was explained to me at Bible college. But we, like Australia, or at least my experiences of church and growing up, were very kind of Arminian, I think is the term. So we had this understanding that God loves everybody. That was the emphasis. God is love. God loves everyone. And then if you reject God, then you're going to be separated from God for all eternity. That was the concept of hell. The emphasis wasn't on eternal conscious torment. It was on eternal separation from God, which I understand to be more Arminian. And so that was like, I went to Baptist churches, Churches of God, Pentecostal. It was all like, as far as I can tell, it was very Australian to believe that, rather than this emphasis on God predestines some for heaven and some for hell. God, sure, you couldn't even really say that God loves everyone, because God deliberately wants to show his love by sending people to hell. That I didn't really understand Calvinism, to be honest, because it seemed so contradictory to love,
Yeah.
whereas the emphasis seemed to be more on God's unconditional love.
And as a
So,
very practical outcome, a lot of people that go towards Calvinism and really embrace it for years, they do just, their character becomes somewhat unloving. It's interesting to see their theology definitely wraps around their personality eventually. Can I ask, with as we, it sounds like we're kind of about to dig into the deeper part of your deconstruction, but as just to set the platform for it, I wanted to ask a couple of quick things, and then we can do these real quick fire. Patriarchy, misogyny. Would you say that your cultural background and your religious background was heavy into men are in charge and women need to submit, and basically, like, that's the best way to, you can kind of push the limits a little bit and probably God's going to still be okay. But if you push them too hard, you're bucking God's best design. Is that how you would have seen it?
that's a really good question. So again, there are some cultural differences from like being Australian versus American. For me personally, I grew up um, hearing some women preach but when I look back, I go, well, yeah, but it was still predominantly male. So you could see that there was the roots of patriarchy that is very much in Australian culture. So government's male, and white too. And just, most pastors are male, but then we do get some females, and yeah, it's kind of like we've started to push all those boundaries. In Australia, there's a lot of different laws about women who have babies being able to be paid for time off while they give birth and raise a child, for maybe even like having a year off is not very difficult in Australia, as it seems like it's very, very difficult here.
Yeah, unfortunately.
um yeah, so it's there are some differences there. So I guess I grew up with a mixed bag. Like, I mean, my mum was a stay-at-home mum till all of the kids were in school, and then she got a degree and started working. Um, so again, mixed bag, like she did both.
Mm.
But I think it was tough pushing back at societal norms and going, okay, I'm gonna get a job and work and follow my dreams. Yeah, but I felt like I had a good female role model in that sense of pushing against that societal standards. Um,
That's awesome.
and also hearing women preachers and things like that. There wasn't a lot of debate where I was about whether or not women can preach, but then in Bible college we at least heard about the history of the debate and how there was a lot of emphasis on women being silent in churches and so on. But it was much more of a, well, we're not like this anymore. There was an emphasis on this is what it used to be, and
Mm.
we don't believe this anymore.
It's interesting. I definitely think that's more healthy, obviously, for a balance there. But the other side of it, where it's like just men, 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 everything is men. It's really, oh, it just sends shivers down my spine how much damage it does to especially like young girls. It's an assumption. It's an assumption that you're second rate and so forth. I wanted to ask a question. I'm probably going to bring this back later. I may forget to, but I wanted to put it out there for now. Evolution. What did you all believe about evolution in science?
Yeah, so I felt like, I don't know, when you get older, you kind of don't remember everything, obviously. So looking back, I was like, I'm sure I was never taught evolution. I was only taught creation at my Christian school. And then my science teacher messaged me and said, no, I actually did teach you evolution. You just don't remember. And I'm like, oh, crap. Okay. So apparently we did get a scientific education, but because it was a Christian school, there was a lot of emphasis on, we don't know if evolution's true. Like they would say, oh, no, no, we don't really think it's true. We think that God created the world in like about 7 days flat, and we've only been here for a couple thousand years. And so I literally had two different science teachers teaching me two different things, because the real the real more sciencey one, he refused to teach creationism. So the principal of the school came in and taught us creationism, and well, this guy took a day off, basically. So that was
That's
kind of,
awesome.
yeah, a
Hmm.
weird memory, but or a warped memory, because I couldn't quite figure out what I was remembering. But yeah, there was a definite emphasis on creation. I remember thinking though, what's the problem? Like I just thought, well, even if evolution was true, why is that problematic? Why does it matter? But at the same time, I didn't like embrace evolution as a teenager. Like it wasn't a big deal to me. I was just like, whatever. But it definitely later on in life, even just a couple of years ago, reading a book called Homo sapiens, I think it was called. And I'm just like reading about evolution and going, wow, I feel like I've never learned this before in my life. And uh, it seems really true, and it makes a lot of sense. And yeah, it's really interesting kind of going on that journey of realizing that your science has been warped by the Bible, and that we have to let go of the Bible being accurate, scientifically accurate. It's not. It's just not.
Mm.
And especially the sun standing still when it's actually not that anything happened, but let's say the earth stood still, not the sun, and that the earth is round and not flat. Like all of those concepts, people get really worked up and upset, and it's just like, why do you expect the Bible to be a scientific textbook? It's not. These people didn't know
Exactly.
this stuff.
Mm. So as you're going through learning different things and you're having different experiences and you're starting to question hell and what role hell should play in your thoughts. Um, One of the other topics I just wanted to bring up, and if I'm jumping ahead on anything, feel free to say, we'll put a pin in that. But one of the topics I wanted to ask about is the LGBTQ plus community. When you look at that, the idea of a conservative Christianity, there's usually a pretty standard message of God only wants straight people to be engaging in sex and getting married and having any relationships, and anything else is an affront to God's plan. How did that background, like what were you taught about that, and how did that evolve as you, I assume, met some people that were from that community and had to, like, did you have to reshape your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was definitely taught being gay is a sin. And that was when I was a child, and as far as I knew, I didn't know any gay people at all. Uh, so it was a bit abstract. It's like, okay, this thing that nobody does is a sin. Okay. uh yeah, so I guess my concept was that I didn't know anyone who did it, didn't think it was common at all. And then when I was 22, I went to both America and Canada because I had relatives in both countries. And I was in Canada, and actually I had made a gay friend in Australia, and I didn't even pick up on things like gay mannerisms and stuff. He just came out one day, and people were like, Didn't you know? Didn't you know he was gay? And I'm like, I don't know this stuff. Like I'm really naive or whatever. But we, remained friends. I didn't judge him for being gay, because I'd already kind of been to Bible college and been through the whole grace awakening and went, well, grace for being gay, awesome. I still believed it was a sin, but I believed it was like a forgiven sin. That's kind of where I was at. And so I went to Canada, and my uncle, I was talking to him about my gay friend, and he looked at me funny, and I went, what does that look about? And a couple of hours later, we were in a car by just me and my uncle, and he said, I'm gay. And I was like, okay, again, came out of nowhere, had absolutely no idea that my uncle was gay because he's married and has 3 children with a woman. And so I'm like, asked him a bunch of questions, and at the time, I believe he believed it was a sin, and he was fighting the gay and
Oh, wow.
trying to, stay married to his wife and look after his kids, and yeah, just constantly fighting the urge to just be yourself, basically. So I felt really sorry for him. I was like, oh, that sounds really hard. But also didn't really understand, well, how did he become gay? That kind of like, I don't get it, but that really sucks. And still loving my uncle, and yeah, and then coming back to Australia and going, hey, how do I talk about this? Well, actually at the time it was a total secret. I wasn't allowed to tell anybody. But a couple of years later he started coming out to the rest of the family, and yeah, just like I eventually said it to someone at my church, like, oh, my uncle, he's gay. And I don't really know what to do because there's this concept of like, if you're gay, you're pretty much screwed. You're either going to hell, or you've got to fight the battle for the rest of your life, or and try and be straight, which he's obviously doing. Like he was obviously trying to be straight. Um, yeah, but I felt I started to feel really conflicted over it, like that it's not fair because I can see how hard it is. And my uncle eventually got a divorce and it started to embrace himself as a gay man and going, okay, I don't think it's a sin anymore, which is great. Like I was pretty shocked probably at the time, but I think looking back, I'm like so proud of my uncle to be able to do that and to go, I'm going to believe that God loves me the way that I am, that I was created this way, or I am this way. It's not a sin, and I'm going to now embrace being a gay man. So watching his journey was incredible, and it was tough for some family members, but I think over time, all of us gradually were just like, well, we still love our uncle, our brother, our however he's related to our son, and we're not going to reject him for this. And then some of us also embracing, well, actually being gay is not a sin because the Bible has been very misinterpreted. And I would like to think also that even if they meant exactly what they said in English, like which has been translated and so on and so forth, that even if it was exactly as written, that people think it's an abomination and so on, that we could actually look back and go, well, that's what they thought then. And this is not how the world is now. They had a limited concept of what was going on in the bedroom, and they were very, pushing patriarchy and male dominance, and had certain ideas about who a man should be. And so they were very disgusted by this idea that men can be with men. Why we have evolved since that and we don't believe this anymore. So why let's not make the Bible a rule book telling us what's right and what's wrong in every area. Sure, it may have some good advice about what's right and what's wrong, but every person who writes the Bible, or who's a contributor, is a human being with an opinion and an agenda, and they can get things wrong. And that's probably more my perspective now, is just how much of it is opinion. And um, it's human beings trying to grapple with who God is. Whereas for the longest time, I would really search and look at Greek words and try and break it down. Well, this word has been mistranslated, and it was never about gay men, it was about pedophilia, things like that, which is probably all still really legitimate, that we can interpret the Bible as like not really talking about homosexuality as we define it today. And we can go, hey, the Bible never really said this at all. But we can also say, well, even if it did, they made some mistakes. They were idiots. They're human. So why do we have to take it all literally?
Can I ask about that, about what you just said? The idea of like looking at specific topics, saying hell or sexuality or any other topic we could bring up. In a lot of our churches, the messaging is not, let's start by looking at sexuality and see what we think of this and this topic, and think, well, how do we feel about hell? Is burning in fire fair, or does that feel like it might be unfair? They would say, don't start there. You start with the question of, is this the word of God? Is this infallible? And once you establish that, then your only message at that point is just to say, well, then what does the Bible really say? Do I understand it correctly? And once I do, quote unquote, once I do really understand it, I will obey it because it is my authority. It sounds like you were giving yourself permission, and I don't know if your church lent to this or not, if there's just a power you took, but how did you get to the place where you were kind of saying, I know that the Bible and God, so to speak, judges me, but I'm going to kind of judge the Bible now. And to reframe it the way you did is saying, these were people who could have made mistakes in the way they thought. That's how they used to think, but they were wrong. Putting yourself in that spot of being the judge of, timeless, eternal truth is a brave thing to do. And especially if you're kind of told that that's God's place, you're taking God's place. How did you keep that power without feeling like you were crossing lines you shouldn't cross with God?
So I think my biblical concept as a child was more literal, but my parents took me to a variety of denominations of churches, and I kind of could see how, like the Baptists, the emphasis seemed to be on baptism, and then there were churches that emphasized communion, and there were churches that uh, emphasized worship and raising of hands. And my school was very much let's raise our hands and happy clappy and all that. Um, so I could see the differences and go, oh, that's weird that we have so many denominations and actually different interpretations of scripture. But I took it as variety. I kind of boiled it down and went, uh, well, maybe it's good that we have diversity and variety, and different options to suit different personalities or whatever. And I didn't take it too seriously, I guess. So then as an adult, um, and going to Bible college, I was able to see, like, I was able to accept that message of, well, the Bible has been translated and there is bias and there are mistakes in translation. There's like the Bible was put together by, well, there were a lot of options of books that could be in the Bible or out of the Bible. And even that, like going back as like choosing which books got in is a whole another dilemma. So kind of learning all of that and going, oh, okay, so the Bible, like we don't know exactly why this got in and why that didn't, and that that it's been rewritten and like so many people wrote down so many things and then they pieced things together and
Did that
it's
scare
all
you though, to
been,
think that your Bible was messed up, as it were, and not necessarily this thing that you'd originally thought it was?
yeah. It was uncomfortable, but I also just kind of wanted to embrace the truth and go, okay, it's not a perfect book and it is subject to interpretation. So from early adulthood, I saw it as something we have to interpret and not something you just take literally at face value. But I mean, I still went to a Pentecostal church that was very, I mean, I find Pentecostal sermons to be very self-help, which is great. I love self-help, but very not very deep and not very like they don't really go into the interpretation of the Bible. And a lot of them have never been to Bible college or anything like that. So
Hmm.
yeah, just still kind of shallow. And I had a more broad, well, it's got to be interpreted. And also, you can go back to the Greek and learn about Greek definitions and so on. So, yeah, I think for a long time, I put the emphasis on going back to context and Greek and or Hebrew and going back to as far back as you can get to try and find out original intent and original meaning. And I found that helpful at the time because it said to me, well, for instance, when some of the words around hell have been probably mistranslated from words that meant the afterlife as opposed to eternal conscious torment, or like that we projected this eternal conscious torment idea onto these words. And yeah, just kind of the same thing with being gay, like arsenocoitus meaning something very different from just straight out homosexual. So yeah, just I think I kind of was open to things being interpretable. Uh, but a lot of people aren't. It's the Bible is treated as very black and white by a lot of people, and I find that very sad. And now, even like after the last few years moving to the States, I take it even like honestly I haven't read the Bible for years now, and I'm kind of so with that probably that removal from reading it all the time and trying to interpret it, I now am like, yeah, I just see it way more as human, very human, like a very human book. People grappling with who God is, people um putting their ideas of what they want God to be into a story and a context, and sharing, this is who I think God is. And that's great. There's nothing wrong with people writing there. This is my experience of God and my understanding, and sharing that with the world. 66 books combined to explain who God is, and we take it and we go, you can't add to that. You can't interpret that. You just got it. It's black and white, and it's all exactly as written. It's perfect, and God wrote it. I've never really thought that God wrote it. It was written by human beings, and we really need to be talking about that in churches, like saying it's not dictated by God. These are human beings who were grappling with who they believe God to be, and now we get to grapple with their opinions and our own, their context and our context, and go, some of this is valuable and some of this is crap. That's where I'm at with the Bible.
I've got to ask, and this is kind of a question that I think most people who watch my channel would be asking at this point. The question of, you still believe in some kind of God, I think. You still believe,
Yes.
I think you would you still call yourself a Christian? Maybe I should ask, and in what sense, if so? But like, what keeps you at this point? You've deconstructed so much that a lot of people at the stage you're at would say, I need to stop trying to piece together what parts of the Bible to keep. It's like saying, which parts of Plato and Aristotle do I keep? I don't keep or not keep any of them. I just read it and glean what I want to if I want to, but I don't have to. It's just another book. It's just another text, an ancient text of people who didn't understand a lot about how the world works. Like, what keeps you clinging at this point, having deconstructed what I would think is pretty far? A lot of Christians would probably say you're not even a Christian at this point. You've deconstructed pretty far. Like, what keeps you pursuing the idea of a God and an afterlife and a universal salvation?
I feel like I'm a Christian to the Christian, if that makes sense. So if I'm talking to Christians, then I definitely want to come across as I'm a Christian, because I don't feel like people are going to listen or respect anything I have to say if I'm saying, no, I'm an atheist, or well, yeah, identifying a different way outside of the Christian bubble. So I'm a Christian to the Christian, which is something that actually, like, I think Paul says in the Bible that he's, I can't even remember now. I haven't read the Bible in so long, I can't even quote it now.
Yep.
But whatever he said, it's that thing. I'm like, I'm a Christian
Yep.
to the Christian.
All things to all
And
people. That's one of them.
yeah, I do actually attend a church, but it's a queer affirming, anti-racist female pastor. Yeah, I like this church, but I only go maybe once or twice a month, and just, it's really, for me, it's about community and making friends, and also wanting to, I'm still finding it difficult to let go of the God concept, and I honestly put that down to mental health for me personally, that I feel like if I gave up believing in God, that it might drive me insane. It's been so ingrained in my entire life
Yeah.
that, yeah, it just feels like a part of me, and to let it go feels dangerous, if I
Like,
can explain it that way.
because of nihilism or something else.
I guess, yeah, I don't know how this is going to sound, but I want to live forever. I
Yeah.
don't want to die and there be nothing. And so, well, I want to exist forever and not consider this concept of nothingness. It feels a little threatening. Um, so, and then I guess I want to believe that God is love, so that when we die, we live on in a loving way, in loving relationship, in intimacy, and good things and happiness, as opposed to some of the traumatic things of this world continuing on forever. That doesn't excite me. I don't want hell,
Hmm.
and I really don't believe in hell. it actually is so illogical to me now. I'm just like, how did we even come up with that? It's absurd.
Yeah. I
So
think because
I am in that place of total rejection of hell and hopeful that there is some kind of heaven or afterlife that is positive. And I'm not exactly ready to give that up. And I think that uh I think that it requires some level of faith or belief to whatever, like everybody has a belief or a worldview. So the worldview that works best for me is to believe that we're going to continue on and that it's going to be loving and positive. And that's, yeah, I've rejected hell and I believe in love. That makes
it,
sense.
I was going to add, I think the question too of hell, I think a lot of that, from my understanding of history, is Zoroastrianism. If you studied that,
Mm.
you know that it seemed like the Jewish people pre the that time frame didn't really elaborate on heaven and hell that much. And when they came out of that
Yeah.
captivity, Persian captivity, they all of a sudden were talking about it left and right, and Zoroastrianism did its job well. Can I ask, do you still frame yourself and or your children in the concepts of sin at all? Do you use the word sin?
No, not really. I don't like that word, to be honest. Uh, I mean, yeah, having small children, I do kind of go like, what you did was not healthy, it wasn't very good, or um, you should rethink certain behaviors, that kind of thing. And we definitely discipline our kids, but the emphasis is on discipline, not punishment, which is like punishment has no goal and no, um, it's like just trying to make you feel better. Like I'm gonna smack you because you're naughty, and I feel relieved for smacking. Like it's yeah,
It's
it
awful.
doesn't make a lot of sense. So I yeah, I don't like smacking, and I am more of a where are we going? Like why like what makes us healthy human beings, and let's aim for that, and uh that kind of discipline, and yeah, if that makes sense.
So your kids aren't probably going to be hearing that they're needing a savior. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly haven't brought it up. We have taken them to church and Sunday school, and I try it. They're still very, very young, so but I think my goal is that I will start saying, so what do you think about what you just heard today? What did you hear, and what did you think about it? And how do you understand all this? They do have conservative grandparents, which is yeah. So I know that they're going to hear conservative stuff at different points,
Hmm.
more conservative. So yeah, I don't want them to feel the level of shame that I felt as a child. I don't want them to feel that same struggle with sin, when I really think that the goal is to be healthy, not emphasis on let's be perfect or let's be sinless, but an emphasis on health and
Hmm.
what's best for you, what feels right, what feels good, what feels healthy.
When you say those things to your kids and you hear yourself saying them, do you feel like there's a sense in which you are taking back your power and your voice as at the same time that you're giving them their power and their voice? Like, did some of the ways in which you were maybe squashed or minimized or silenced before, it was like it's time to break this cycle and in a sense get your own voice back in the process?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, being a parent just really wakes you up to all of the different things that you were taught and that influenced you, and how you can do it differently for your kids. Yeah, so yeah, I really want them to be a lot more free than I was. It is hard sometimes not to fall into the traps though, definitely, of like wanting your kids to, like, for instance, not swear, because I don't can't even explain my own, like, I know I haven't really sworn today in front of you, for instance, but I'm really good at not doing it in public, and then behind closed doors I swear like a trooper. That's the expression we use in Australia. I swear like a
Nice.
trooper. So yeah, but again, like it's that there's a war within where I'm like, saying to my kids, please don't use this language in front of your grandparents because they will kill me.
That's funny.
This is private language. We only use this at home, basically. So there's
And you know
always
it's
a
going to come
battle
out
between,
sometime. It's going to come
yeah,
out
I know.
sometime.
Yeah. Yeah. It's always kind of weird juggling that whole like what is sin, what is conservative, right and wrong, and then trying to allow for freedom, but then also feeling like, well, if you are totally free and use that language in front of your grandparents, I'm the one who's going to cop it.
Yeah. I do want to mention real quick one thing just to say I'm so glad you said this. You said that you wanted to live forever. And it's really interesting. I interview a lot of people who, whenever that conversation comes up, they say, I kind of did maybe as a Christian, but now that I think about it, I really don't want to live forever. I'd rather have, just in my life, live it to the fullest and then wrap it up and, go back to nothingness. And a lot of atheists say that. And I kind of get it, but I'm with you. Like I wanted to live forever and I still do. And I
Mm,
still like I use that expression, Christianity broke my heart. I really thought I was going to live
mm.
forever. And atheists will often say, it's just heaven sounded so boring. It's just going to sing praises to God all the time. And I was
I
like,
don't think of it that way.
yeah, I didn't think of it that way either per se, but I was just like, your imagination to me is like, you're not, you don't have a scope for the imagination. If this God exists and he created the universes with all the stars and the galaxies, you really think he's going to create a boring heaven? Like you really think that? We can imagine
Yeah.
like Willy Wonka and the chocolate factory and like this crazy guy with Oompa Loompas can make a chocolate world that's so amazing. You don't think the God of the universe can do a little better? And they would
Yeah.
say, well, but it's the idea of time. Like you can't imagine forever and ever and ever is going to be so boring. And I remember
Mm,
that passage in the Odyssey where the men gets trapped on an island, and Odysseus I think is with the one of those goddesses. I forget what her name was, but he's like, I know I've been here for a few days, but I need to get back to my family, my wife. And she's like, you've been here for 7 years. He's like, what?
wow.
I've been here for just a few days. Like, no, it's been 7 years. And it's like God is timeless. He can make heaven
Mm,
feel, if you were real, he can make heaven feel like you've been there for a trillion years and it's just a blink of an eye. Like I don't get it. And if you really love life and you love the beauty of each other and the preciousness of your children and their laughter and time with them, it's like, why wouldn't you want that forever? Especially if the Bible's passages about there's no tears there. If you could just get rid of the hell part, which is obviously the horrible part of it, but if
yeah.
heaven were real, it's a beautiful dream, and it still breaks my heart. And I still think it's someday when I'm hopefully older, when the end of my time comes, it's going to take my breath away to think this is it. And I don't like
Yeah.
that at all, and I still struggle with it a lot.
I think one of the reasons that I maybe do have this perspective is just that. So when I was 28 and my mum was 48, she passed away from bowel cancer. And
Mm,
yeah, just that whole idea of never seeing her again, I personally find that pretty painful. So
I'm so
I
sorry.
want to believe that she lives on, and I want to believe that we will see each other again. Maybe not as, we might not look like human beings, or I have no idea, but just sensing each other again, feeling each other's presence, our consciousness being reunited and going, and more, a deeper level of reconciliation is what I want between not just me and my mum, but any, human beings that, I don't know. Do you ever look back and go, I had such a difficult relationship with this person, but if I really understood them and they really understood me, we would we would be able to love each other and be friends, and I kind of want that level of reconciliation with all the various people that I've met across this life. People who rejected me for rejecting hell, who are like, well, I'm going to delete you off Facebook because you're crazy. Just for, I stopped believing in hell. Like, I'm like, I don't get it. We were friends. I would like reconciliation with these people. Like, the feeling of now you get why I did what I did, and now I can better understand why you did what you did, and now we can be better friends and more intimate and closer. I would love that. That's my heaven, is imagining that we understand each other better, we forgive each other, in the sense of really, really connecting to the understanding of why we are the way we are, and being able to be friends and be family and live on in consciousness, in total reconciliation. So when I after my mum passed away, well, actually, before my mum passed away, we met a pastor called Santo Colaco, and changed churches and went to his church. And after mum passed away, I read Love Wins by Rob Bell, and I handed it to Pastor Santo and said, "You got to read this book," because I'd been a hopeful universalist, and now I was reading this book, going, "Yeah, I just want to embrace there is no hell," and believing that God is so loving that God can reconcile the whole world. We all understand each other, we all love each other. That's what I kind of want. And so he didn't really like Love Wins, but he ended up reading another book called The Evangelical Universalist, and he gave that, or told me to read the book. And then we, like, our little church, it was kind of like a house church, we all came out as universalists. And yeah, so I embraced a new message that God is so loving that the whole world can be reconciled to one another and love one another and forgive. And yeah, that was my concept at that time, of like universal reconciliation and heaven. Why I wanted to live forever was with this hope that it would be way better than this life. Yeah, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, I mean, especially with your loss there, that's overwhelming. And I've often thought how I would deal with it if one of my four children passed, early, and or a parent, that just, how do you deal with that? It's such a crushing thought. It's kind of, it's been nice in one sense for me to deconstruct without that. My father actually died right before I deconverted, but it wasn't. He and I didn't have a very strong relationship, and it honestly didn't feel like a huge loss. If you know what I mean. I mean, I felt sad, but he'd been kind of a rough dad to me over the years, and it didn't feel like it was a big deal to lose him. But if my mom, for example, she's still living. When she passes, it's going to be really sad. It's a hard thing to think about, and especially I think more about my kids. Like if the kids were to ever have an accident, it just is like, how would it not crush you to just not dream of seeing them again, holding them one more time? And it's a hard thing. It's a very hard thing to deal with, and the emotions come in like crazy in these topics. And I appreciate
Yeah.
that people like you seem more real about this, to say like this isn't like, we're not trying to just catalog and chloroform and dissect all the different arguments for hell versus no hell, God versus no God. Like, there's emotions behind this, and this, no matter
Yeah.
where you land, it hurts. It hurts either way, no matter where you land on these topics. And once you land somewhere, it's going to hurt more because somebody's going to hate you for it. And so the
Yeah.
hatred, the pain kind of has a wave effect. But I guess maybe to steer to the next question on that note, like, you're kind of on the fence in this in some ways. I mean, it's compared to where I was when I was a Christian, you're way more out than in. But you're kind of still straddling the fence a little bit. When you look at both sides and you look at people who are maybe more extreme, like perhaps you could argue that I'm extreme. I'm like straight up, and I'm an atheist. I don't think there's any evidence for a God or an afterlife. And you look at Christians, of course, with their perspective. Someone like you
Yeah.
who's sort of in the middle, what do you see as like a way to bridge those conversations, and to say, you all both have something important to say, but you're talking past each other. We need to be able to talk to each other, and to have conversations where we're actually expressing this with more respect and openness, and to explain why, for example, you Christians, you're not looking at where the mythology came from, but you atheists, you're not answering the question, why is there something rather than nothing? And why is there so much beauty in certain aspects of creation and mathematical design? And there's issues that both sides will bring up, and we're talking past each other. And I feel like one of the
Mm.
biggest dreams of my heart would be to see our culture start to say, I mean, I don't know, quite how to find middle ground, because I feel like you can't find middle ground with some Christians in some ways, if you know what I mean. Like they just, it's their way or the highway. Whereas atheists are
Yeah.
like, let's talk, let's debate. And Christians are like, no, like let's debate, but at the end of the day, I'm right and you're definitely wrong. But I mean, how do you feel like the conversations can evolve to a more mature level?
Wow. I think you're asking wonderful questions, by the way, which is why I'm just like, wow, every time.
Thank you. They're on
Uh,
my heart a lot. They're definitely heartfelt questions. It hurts, thinking about these.
yeah, yeah. I think a lot of the time we have to try to find as much in common with the people that we don't want to as we can, because they don't hear until there's something that is like enough similar that they're like, I relate to that. You have to find something relatable first before you can broach other topics. So, I mean, it's as simple sometimes as just talking about hobbies or other things that aren't religious, to try and broach the or breach the gap of do we have something in common here in our humanity and our lifestyles? I mean, yeah, there's plenty of things that we actually do have in common. A lot of us have families and we love people. So we can talk about relationship and start there and then go, well, you know how much you love your kid. Why would you ever think of your kid burning in hell? Again, putting something out there that's a little bit not conservative, a bit over the top, or whatever you want to call that, to rattle their cage a little bit after you've been able to establish, well, we all love our kids, or we all like, things that you have in common. Um, yeah, broaching it from that place, I think, is the only way you can do it. Yeah, and I think of my own in-laws and my dad, who are conservative, but they're also very loving human beings. That is definitely the place that I start. Like I want to start conversations from, well, I know how much you love me and I love you. And so why would you think that our uncle who is gay, why would you think that automatically means, well, okay, maybe it doesn't automatically mean hell, but it means like, I don't know if he's saved. I don't know like what's going on here. This doesn't, he's just a human being. And why would you want anyone to suffer hell or um, suffer the loneliness of not being able to love the way you want to love just because of like genitalia or something? Like what is the reason here? Think back to where did this really come from, and why do we have a problem with this? Yeah, I mean, I've tried to have some of these conversations with my dad, and it's very awkward sometimes.
Mm.
But
Well,
yeah, you have to kind of start from that, what you have in common, what you maybe do agree on, even though it's really hard to find sometimes. But common ground first, and then asking a question that jars them a little bit.
mm, I agree. I love it. It's a good answer. We got to start somewhere, right? We got to try. Got to, all we can
Yeah.
do is try. And I think too, sometimes just like I remember growing up, I had almost nobody in my world that was an atheist. It was just like unheard of. But I had this one uncle who was like way on the other side of the country. And it was like easier to just ignore him because he was on the other side of the country. But over the years, I heard that he was this wonderful dad, just a great, great dad. And I was comparing him in my mind over the years, like, my dad isn't like that. I don't describe my dad that way. And it's just like,
Mm.
that the verse we used to talk about, or the song, they'll know we're Christians by our love. It's almost like it's flipped for me. Like they'll know we're atheists by our love. It's really crazy. So like Christians aren't that
Yeah.
loving to me anymore. And atheists have
Mm.
become so much more loving. And I kind of want to out love the Christians.
Yeah.
And it's hopefully that becomes part of it too. Could I ask
Yeah.
in terms of your you mentioned your family there. How have some of those conversations gone? Have you been able to get an edge in terms of just building bridges a little bit?
I think like with my dad, trying to broach the topic of whether or not people are still saved when they come out as non-binary or trans or anything else. He he at least let me speak. So I was able to say a big long, what about this? What about this? And what about this? kind of thing. Without without him getting too upset, like actually listening, which is good. Um, so I think that means that there's a seed planted. And
Mm.
yeah, to use that reference. I I hope that he considers it some more, and maybe one day he'll be able to um, be more accepting of the LGBTQIA plus community, especially since he has a lot of relatives in that camp. I think also sometimes I try to think of older generations as a little bit like they've had a different context, a different background, different influences, and maybe we allow for them to be a bit more stuck than the newer generations that are evolving um, differently and have different influences. So I try sometimes when I'm upset and I'm like, why do they think this way? I just go think of it's their generation a little bit to like it gives me some element of comfort that maybe it's just a generational thing, and look, the generations are evolving away from that type of thinking, and I can accept the fact that this generation may never change, like the older generations might never change, and
Mm.
that's sometimes you have to be a bit more accepting of they just don't get it for some
Yeah.
reason.
And probably our
But
kids will say the same thing about our generation someday.
yeah, something that we don't get.
We'll be
Yeah.
the ones stuck. So, can a lot of my questions have been very, I guess, deep maybe, and some of them painful. I'm going to ask a question that's a lot more surfacey, just to kind of
Mhm.
break the ice. And now I've got a couple last questions to wrap us up. Going back to evolution and
Mhm.
connecting that to universalism. And this is not putting you on the spot. I'm just curious if you've heard people talk about this question and how you would see it if you had to give an answer. So universalism is the idea that everybody's eventually going to get saved.
Yeah.
If you're deconstructing that far, you're probably open to science and evolution. Most people
Mhm.
that go that route. So you would probably agree that we're evolved from the primates, which means there were earlier iterations of us.
Yeah.
How do people that look at universalism deal with the earlier iterations of, uh, you know, people that were eventually going to be, primates that are eventually going to become humans? Like were the Neanderthals included in heaven? Were the ones that looked much more like primates and monkeys, that were like several iterations back? Would they have like did they address that question when they go into universalism, or is it just like let's just assume that they're all kind of in the animal world and they're all there's no soul for them, but it's probably us and maybe with a little leeway for one iteration of humans before we're the ones that have the souls, so we're the ones where this question matters, but before that it's irrelevant. How do they deal with that, or do they include animals and say no, there's probably animals are going to be there too, probably all of them? Like how do they how or if you've never heard that question, how would you think to at least start answering that question?
I haven't really heard it discussed much, but I think there's a lot of people who embrace the idea now of like your pet going to heaven. And I would personally think that if we're going to live on, then everything is going to live on, but hopefully that it would be healthier than right now. So like I kind of think of this earth as continuing on, and well, I mean, I don't know if it can, it may not, but I guess I think of the afterlife as a new earth or a reconciled earth or a healthy earth. And so I think of all the various animals and stages and um as included as their best selves.
Hmm.
I would hope. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that movie, Robin Williams, What Dreams May Come. Have you heard of that? Seen that one?
Yes.
It's like
Hmm.
that idea of your most beautiful dreams. I don't personally subscribe to it. I don't think any of it's real. I think we don't unfortunately go anywhere when we die. But it's a beautiful. It's like there's nothing wrong with dreaming. There's nothing wrong with hoping. And so I think we need to be careful as atheists to say just because we're concluding this, that doesn't mean that the dreams that we had weren't real and that the loss of it isn't incredible. And also to acknowledge for people that are deconstructing and deconverting, saying I get it. Like this isn't an easy decision. Like you're if I as an atheist and if my worldview is accurate at all, you have a lot
Mhm.
to lose, and that's going to hurt you. And the more that you move in this direction of thinking, yeah, there probably isn't a God, there may not be an afterlife. This isn't academic. This is very real. And I
Yeah.
think we need to be sensitive to people going through it because it's there's a fear factor. They're like, if what you're saying is true, then I'm afraid. I'm afraid of that. I'm afraid of nihilism, and it all weaves
Mm.
together.
Yeah.
I was going to say, ask if you could, I wanted to see if you want to respond to any of that, but then also if you could take us next into a little bit of your website, your blog, your music, like tell us how people can connect with you and kind of what your projects are.
Yeah, so I've created the Evangelical Deconstruction Journey website, and I do blog on there occasionally. I do have two small children, so my time is limited. But you can also sign up for my newsletter, which is only like once a month, just to keep in touch and hear where things are at for me in my deconstruction journey. And I love hearing other people's deconstruction journeys. Um, and yeah, meeting where we are at, whether atheist, Christian, whatever. uh, and yes, I continue to play the piano and sing and occasionally put stuff out there for that. I can't even remember the name of my new YouTube channel that I just created, but it's probably Eady Jay or Evangelical Deconstruction Journey. And yeah, I've actually written some books, but the fiction that I wrote years ago was very angels and demons and spiritual warfare stuff. So if you still like, supernatural type shows or even Harry Potter-ish, or if it doesn't offend you, you might want to check out Covenant 999, which I wrote in my 20s. I'm in my 40s now, just FYI. Um, and I am currently writing about my deconstruction of purity culture and sexual trauma. So that's more memoir style, and writing about other aspects of deconstruction, and hoping to publish some books in the next couple of years on those topics, and also on weight loss, my weight loss journey, which factors in as well. And
Hmm.
yeah.
Well, as you get those books over the finish line, I definitely hope you'll reach back out. We'd love to, especially the ones about deconstruction, love to read those and kind of go through them with you because that's awesome. Can I ask with Joy Williams? I hope to get her on here at some point to interview her. But what is the Journey of Joy podcast all about?
So Joy is her name, but also I think my friend Joy exudes joy, and I think she just wants people to find joy in life. So she began a podcast, and um, I, I'm maybe a little less joyful. I mean, I know I'm smiling and happy right now today, but yeah, some of the interviews we've done are actually way more serious about grief and about sexual trauma and purity culture and all kinds of really deep topics. So she's definitely open to exploring all of these various topics, as well as journeying towards joy and health, I think.
Hmm, that's awesome. And again, talking about topics, I mentioned this at the beginning, but your blog has a lot of interesting entries there. So I hope people will check it out. You've got some really good stuff. There's so much to think through. It's like there's always more to say and there's always more to read and
Yeah.
always more to heal from. I was
Yeah.
actually going to ask earlier about purity culture. I know we're kind of here probably at the end, but just could I just ask, how has that journey of healing been for you to get past that? Because especially with
Oh,
the other parts of your story, like how is it
yeah.
going?
It's pretty intense, I would say. So I I didn't meet my husband until I was 30 in 2013. And at that time still was abstaining from premarital sex. And but mind you, I had definitely pushed the boundaries and done a few things that trying to break free from this idea that I have to abstain till I'm married or abstain forever because I didn't know if I was ever getting married. And really, it's funny how, well, it's not funny, but the kind of implication that people make that you deconstructed to have sex. You have no idea how tempted I was to do exactly that. Like to just say, look, I'm just, if it means I have to be an atheist for me to have sex, I think I'm going to give up on Christianity, become an atheist, and have sex. Like it was this debate in my head of like, my body is telling me I want it, and I'm stopping myself for years and years and years. It becomes extremely, like, it becomes mentally torturous. Yeah. So I was definitely at that point in my late 20s, early 30s of just going, why am I waiting? This is insane. Like just to try and be, I don't even know, to try and be the good girl or what? Yeah. But I think also having sexual trauma that really had me I was also scared of having sex. So I was also just like, I don't even know how to bring myself to do it. Like I don't feel capable. I feel very threatened. Like, this guy could hurt me. I don't want to be naked. I don't like all the things. Like it was just a very stressful. On the one hand, I really want it, and on the other hand, I don't even know if I want it. Like it's very, yeah. So honestly, it took a lot of working through that, like really just soul searching and going, okay, I'm terrified of having sex. I also really want to have sex. Yeah. And letting it all, like actually being honest about it. I think just admitting it all is very helpful to getting you to a place where you can actually engage. So,
Mm.
um, yeah, by the time I met my husband, pretty much I was ready to throw caution to the wind. But at the same time, both being Christian, raised in Christian households, and even as universalists, still believing that the ideal is, we want to be together forever in our marriage. So waiting is good for us because it should hopefully sustain a really long-term healthy relationship. That's kind of the concept that we had. So we did wait in the most literal sense or the most extreme, not doing penis in vagina, but everything else was kind of like, who cares? Let's do that instead.
Mm.
Yeah, so we fooled around but didn't go the whole way till we were married when I was 32. So I mean, that's a crazy story in itself. And as I said before, I met him on Facebook, which was basically we both were deconstructing hell and became friends because of that and started talking online every day. And uh, I was in Australia, he was here in North Carolina. So the time difference was interesting. But he's a bit of a night owl and he was working nights. So he was kind of awake when I was awake, which was really helpful. Yeah, and eventually met his family. He met my family, and we both traveled to each other's countries, our homes. And he moved to Australia for 6.5 years and married me there, and we had kids. And then we decided to move to America to give it a try, to spend time with his side of the family as well, give them some time. So
Very cool. Very cool.
yeah.
It's interesting the journey you're talking about too with purity culture. I often think that for so many of us, there's like this surfacey stuff of like, did you do this or didn't you? Did you keep yourself pure? Did you touch, in this way or that? But there's also like this, like you mentioned, just like the freedom to talk about these topics. But I think also just
Mm,
like that internal voice of like saying, I am I'm allowed to want it. Like I'm allowed to want sex. I'm allowed to want pleasure. I'm allowed to want orgasm.
Yeah.
I've joked before. It's not a joke, but it's like I say it tongue in cheek that at my Bible college in Pennsylvania, the dean of men got all the men together this one time, this one year, like all together in the dining room, just the men. And I was thinking like it was like a 6 p.m. kind of rally. I was thinking it was gonna be like, be firm in your faith with the Lord and go share the gospel and be in the word and whatever, let the Holy Spirit reign. I thought it was gonna be something like that, and it was like it was
Mm.
one message: stop masturbating. Like, what? Like
Wow.
that's your rallying cry for the men of this Bible college.
Uh,
A third of which are pastoral students. um it was just, but it was like that sense of like, you're allowed to want that stuff, you're allowed to delight in it.
yeah.
And I love the phrase, just because of the alliteration, embracing eroticism. Like it's okay
Mm.
to think eroticism is really good, both when you're
Yeah.
just by yourself and with someone else. And for so
Mm.
many of us, it's like being safe in your own skin, like I used that phrase earlier. That's a big piece of it, is just saying it's really good that I want this stuff, and I'm not going to look down on myself anymore for wanting it. I'm not going to call it a sin
Yeah.
that I like to think
Yeah.
about this or want that. And it's very healing, but it takes a while, and eventually you're like, I have no shame, but it's the journey up to that point is pretty hard.
Yeah, I've definitely thrown out the masturbation is a sin. Yeah, that was a big it actually was quite a debate. It was never told to me point blank it's a sin, but it was always it's kind of implied. It's like, well, we don't really know, so you better not do it.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, um part of my journey was embracing masturbation and just eventually going, this is not wrong. This is healthy. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and enjoying it and finding pleasure. Yeah,
Hmm.
all of that.
And it's amazing too, once that's such a big deal that once you cross some of those bridges, you realize there's other emotional constructs that you've been suppressed on, that you're like, oh, like I'm always like, for example, one thing I struggle with a lot is like I've really struggled to be not working nonstop. Like if I go
Mm.
watch a show like Seinfeld or something funny, or something I like, for 15 minutes, I feel guilty. I'm like, you shouldn't be
Mm.
doing things for yourself. You should be working nonstop. The kingdom. And I've been like in that frame of mind, like
Yeah.
you don't take care of yourself in a, like, if you take care of yourself, it's like take care of your body, exercise, but you don't do things for you. You do things for God and the church and the kingdom. And to be like, I can be at least a
Mm.
little selfish, and it's quite okay. You're opening up all these like little balls of wax or whatever, or the Pandora's box, I should say. And you realize you're suppressed on a lot of levels, not just sexually. And it's like, it's a whole new world of healing that starts to happen. It's great, but it's like, you
Mm.
have to realize there's so many roots buried in deep. But
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
hmm. Well, I know I've kept it
Yeah.
for a while. I did want to bring us to wrap up, but was there anything I forgot to ask that you wanted to mention before we wrap up today?
Probably just that moving to the States has also impacted my deconstruction journey. I guess like you have different concepts of what racism, sexism, and so on, all the isms are. So I don't know, moving to America has just brought those things to my attention. Those have been things that I've been deconstructing more while I've been here and reading a lot more books and listening to a lot more podcasts about it. Um, yeah, so my journey has evolved and it kind of moves through these stages of deconstructing hell, deconstructing purity culture, deconstructing LGBTQ, affirming and all that stuff. And then eventually now it's more political, I think. Uh, yeah,
Hmm.
and just to push towards including everyone and being more loving and grace-based towards everyone, which is kind of universalistic.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just thought I would add that in to try and
Yeah.
bring it around.
It's a good point. Yeah. Eventually, some of these things have very real life, even cultural, political ramifications. And if you really
Mm.
do believe that people deserve to be treated differently than we were treating them all these years, then yeah, we vote differently and we think differently. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I've definitely got a passion for that. I heard people say early on when I did this channel, I'd mentioned a little bit like that. They'd say you need to stay in your lane. I'm like, Trust me, the atheist lane is political. It is not apolitical at all. The atheist lane has very
Mm.
big ramifications, and we can't talk about healing from Christianity and then say politics has nothing to do with it. It's very connected. But anyway,
Yes, yeah.
well, I really appreciate your sharing your story. Again, even though we haven't landed exactly the same place, I feel like we've definitely gone through some things that I can relate to, and I appreciate your vulnerability. You're one of the most open people with your journey that I've come across, and I just both here but also on your blog. I really appreciate your willingness to share your story with us, and I think like I've said so many times that other people said first, but your journey becomes someone else's survival manual, and you're helping people
Mm.
just by your story. So thank you so much. It's just awesome to get to know you and get to hear your story.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed speaking to you and hearing some of your story as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll wrap up then by saying we've been speaking with Eady Jay. Eady, thank you so much again. And everyone, please go check out, like, and subscribe, and check out our blog and our music and the Spotify. I have all the links beneath this video. But again, thank you so much. Great to get to know you. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Thanks, Eady.